All right, we are reaching the top of the hour. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I know that someone had messaged in the chat that they would like an audio check. So hopefully you all can hear me loud and clear. John, does everything sound good on your end?
Sounds great from my end.
Perfect. So we're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. Okay, perfect. Sounds great for everybody else too. Thank you everybody for joining today's webinar, How to Prepare Your Organization for FOIA Requests. Just want to thank everyone for being here. And the first thing I'd like to do is take a second to introduce today's speakers. My name is Shana Horka, and I work in product marketing here at Gimel. And I'm joined by our key speaker today, Gimel's solution architect, John Kubion. Now, before we get started, I have just a couple of housekeeping items to go through. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit them on the Q&A section on your screen, which I've seen a couple of you have seen the chat option. There is also a Q&A option that you can submit questions on as well. There will be at least one poll question that you'll see pop up towards the end of the presentation. So please keep an eye out for that, and we ask for your participation. It's completely anonymous. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. Additionally, we are going to provide the recording of this to anybody interested between 24 to 48 hours after this recording, or after this presentation, excuse me. All right, so to kick things off, I have just one slide here to tell you a little bit about Gimel and how we can help you take control of your information with our suite of solutions. Founded in 2002, Gimel is a records, information management, and governance software company that helps you balance the value your information provides with the risk it also presents. Whether you're trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, quickly respond to information requests, or comply with policies across multiple repositories, Gimel can help you achieve your information governance goals. We have a client success team and a global network of partners that deliver solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft and SAP. Gimel's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solutions include records management, content governance for SharePoint, document management for SAP solutions, file analysis, and Gimel migration, which helps you achieve the fastest migrations from OpenText to Microsoft 365. We are also very excited to announce our most recent acquisition of InfoLinks this month, adding robust physical records management capabilities to our growing solution suite. But without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it over to John so he can get started with today's presentation.
Thank you, Shana. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about FOIA. And I'd like to also note that during the presentation, we may reference federal agencies specifically, but I wanted to make the point ahead of time that everything we're going to talk about today in this presentation is applicable to, both state and local as well. So keep that in mind. So what is FOIA? I believe we all know what FOIA is. If you don't, in 1966, the Freedom of Information Act was passed to give the public the right to ask for access to records from any federal agency. And the federal agencies are required to disclose this information unless it falls under some of the exemptions, which could protect personal privacy, national security, and law enforcement. And important to note is that generally agencies have 20 days to provide a response. They may not provide the information, but they have to actually provide a response in that time. So the FOIA process can be a complex one, and it can take various shapes and forms. But what the focus of today's presentation is with respect to FOIA is around the search of records. And what are the challenges that most people have, and how we can help you to respond more efficiently with your requests. So what kind of challenges you might have? Increasing number of FOIA requests. As an example, CDC reported this year 100% increase in requests over last year. Number two, data volumes continue to explode year after year. A report from Forbes a few years ago actually said that more data was generated in the last 2 years than the entire human history before that. That's pretty large amount of data, and I'm sure it's gotten worse. Number 3, timely responses, as we mentioned, are required in most cases within 20 days. And then on top of that, organizations have become more and more resource strapped with less staff to help respond to the requests. Another example involving CDC, they reported that a lot of their staff across their programs were activated to assist with the pandemic, and that is impacting the agency's ability to obtain records directly from those programs. And then finally, some organizations aren't enabled by technology to respond efficiently. So how can we help with these challenges? During this presentation, we're going to look at a couple of things. We're going to start off with information governance best practices and how you can set a good foundation for finding responsive records. Second, we're going to take a look at how GIML manages records. Third, we're going to share a couple of thoughts on retention and disposition and how this can actually impact your response. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about search and how you can effectively search through your record repositories. So a little bit more about information governance. Shana talked a little bit about this in the introduction. But what I'd like to mention again is that really information governance is all about balancing risk with the value of the information it can provide. More importantly, it is about ensuring that the information you have is useful and can provide value while it is retained. So let's take a moment to talk about some components of information governance that are critical to enabling findability of records. This is the big one, metadata. It's the most critical component to being able to find and manage and dispose of records. Metadata increases value, usefulness, and can reduce risk by enabling proper records management and disposition at the right time. If information is not classified and tagged appropriately with the right information, then it is not easily governed and can pose that risk that we talked about. It's also a lot less useful because it's harder to find. So as part of all of our presentations, and when we talk about information governance, we talk about ways to strengthen your information governance platform. And by far, one of the biggest ones is around metadata and classification. So we encourage any organization to try to do their best at tagging appropriately the content that is in their repositories that may or may not at one point in time become a record. And that also can help with your ability to find that. We also talk about auto classification and automation because when you auto classify where possible and you automate, you are taking that responsibility out of the user's hands, the end users that are working with the content itself, and you're reducing the possibility for human error. So we encourage organizations to utilize technology architectures, for example, in SharePoint, to enable as much automation and auto classification of the information as possible, not only to reduce that burden on the users, but to help reduce their need to actually provide metadata. So that could include architecting your solution, say in SharePoint Online, to incorporate ways to auto-classify content. If someone puts a file into a certain library, automatically apply metadata to that so that at a later time, it's more findable and it's actually easier to manage from a records perspective because you know exactly what it is and you can apply policy to it. We're going to talk a little bit more about how GIML does that, but that's one way that GIML actually applies policy to records in SharePoint and in the various repositories that we work with. Federated records management. So federated records management, or otherwise called in-place records management, utilizes technology to manage the records where they reside without copying or moving them into a central repository. What this means is we just leave the content where it is, where it's authored, where it is sitting, and where it is managed by the users that need that business content or that content or information that they're working with to be for them to do their work. Clearly, it's common that many organizations have records and information dispersed across many platforms, whether it be file shares, SharePoint, legacy repositories like Box or FileNet or Documentum. And GIML's approach to records management is this in-place records management philosophy, where we utilize technology in the form of connectors that reach out into each of these types of repositories to invoke policy on the records or on the information where it sits. So we can establish classification rules that can crawl the, after we crawl the repository, we can apply based on these classification rules a policy to that. And when there is a necessity to change the information lifecycle of the record, we can do that by way of our technology and our connectors. Now that includes physical records. So our solution actually can manage physical records as well. Shana mentioned a recent acquisition of ours, but we also already had physical records management as part of our core GIML records management product, where we can manage physical resources that may be sitting out in a storage vendor. We can do warehouse and space management, barcode support. We can migrate information into the repository for physical assets that you have out at a storage vendor or even on site in your own location. So the value that you get is that you can find the physical assets alongside the electronic assets that are being managed. I mean, you've got information all across, electronic information all across your organization that you could have connectors pulling in and giving you visibility into. But now you add on top of that the ability to see your boxes that are sitting on a shelf at Iron Mountain. So you have the capability to find those assets as well as the electronic assets. So proper disposition can reduce the volume of the data that is going to need to be searched to find responsive information and reduce the risk of keeping information past its retention. With GIML records management, we manage the complete life cycle of the records, and we dispose of them appropriately and create destruction certificates in accordance with the approved retention schedule that you have configured in the system. We think that it's important for you to follow your retention schedule and be able to apply that uniformly across all of the records you're managing. And we also like to recommend that you use as much automatic disposition processes as possible to avoid unnecessary reviews and approvals that may have to happen. But we do provide the ability for you to route destruction and disposition requests to the appropriate parties to get approvals prior to that taking place. GIML uses a centralized file plan for your retention schedule in the Gimel Records Management product, and that one plan applies to all of the different information that you may be managing. So we talked about managing assets across the board in multiple different repositories like SharePoint or Documentum or Box or network file shares, or even physical assets that are, on site at your office or at a third party location like Iron Mountain. Gimel's file plan manages with one file plan all of those assets. So that gives you visibility into all of those records, no matter where they sit. And of course, search. It all comes down to search and being able to find the information that you need to find to respond to the request. So looking at how we've evolved this presentation, the idea of information governance and applying metadata and putting a platform in place that can support better findability and better visibility is all what you're going to need to do in order to provide a better capability to produce the responsive information that you're looking for. And it all comes down to search. So we have the capability in the product to give you visibility across all of those repositories, to execute searches, to find responsive content in all of those repositories, no matter where it lives, the electronic content and the physical, and execute searches to be able to pull that back. Then you can decide how you're going to interface with, for example, the FOIA coordinators that may be requesting the information, and you may decide you want to provide them with a list of all of that information with links to see the content so that they can take action on whether or not you need to actually put that information on hold in the repository, and then provide that information as part of their response. We also, as Shana mentioned, have a tool called Altitude, which is more targeted at file analysis and discovery. And this is critical where you have a lot of unstructured content. For example, the most popular place for this is in file shares, where you have content in directories that really has little or no metadata to really tell you a lot about what it is. But there may be things buried in there that you want to uncover, for example, PII. So this tool actually allows you to crawl that information and identify PII that you would want to know that it's there, label and tag that content. Also eliminate redundant, obsolete, trash, garbage that's in those repositories, so that you're not having to cull through that as part of your search for your responsive information. A lot of people use these types of tools to clean up content prior to migrating that into their official repository, modern repository of the future, whether that be SharePoint Online or other. You don't want to migrate a lot of redundant, duplicate, trash, temp files into your core records repository. So it's good to clean that up. You also have the opportunity to tag that, pick out different aspects of the content and use that to tag the content as an invoice or a certain type of document that you're going to be able to use those tags to classify, not only in the repository, but potentially as a record if it meets the classification rules. And this tool can be used to classify or analyze files in SharePoint, Box, file shares, OneDrive, Exchange, or even on users' workstations and laptops. So the business case, and this is what really it all comes down to. FOIA and oversight requests have been around for a long time, and GIML has been working in and around this for a long time as well. But these aspects are all quantifiable, and you can build a business case to procure tools that can help you respond to requests more effectively, faster, and more efficiently. And we wanted you to know GIML actually also has an ROI calculator, which we have built from interactions with our customers, engagements where we've worked with different organizations to work through this process. And this can help your agency with the business case to make more informed decisions on actions that you could take to help reduce costs and increase response efficiency.
All right, so I'm going to pop back in here. Thank you, John. So we went over a couple of best practices and some tools that can help you be more efficient when, from the records manager aspect of answering FOIA requests. We did talk about various different software products. If you would like to see a demonstration of any of these solutions, you'll see a poll pop up on your screen right now. And if you could just answer yes or no, not at this time, it'll give us a good idea of what we should show a little bit more or how we can help you better understand our tools. So we'll give a couple of seconds to answer that, and then we will move on to a little bit of Q&A. And while we're waiting on this, John, there was a bit of a chat in the chat box about expanding a little bit more on GIML migration and talking a little bit more about that. So I don't know if you can just tell a little bit more on maybe a brief overview for those of you who've been following GIML and haven't heard of our acquisition to include GIML migration. But if you could just talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get into the actual Q&A.
Sure, absolutely. So, you know, one of the aspects of our governance, information governance message is trying to get things into a better state of being governed and managed, and migration is a good component in that overall solution. We recently acquired a company that had a strong presence in that area, and it really its strengths are in migrating from OpenText content server to SharePoint or SharePoint Online, and doing it really efficiently and effectively, giving you the opportunity to clean and plan your migration, do some mapping of metadata. Clearly, migration is a complex project because you're moving between, a lot of times, between two repositories that have differing object models, differing permission capabilities, different aspects for storing your content in one monolithic box versus in segregated areas. So we've got some tools now that can speak to enabling pretty fast migration from repositories. We right now have the capability of migrating from file systems, from content server, and from Documentum. And that list is probably going to be expanding because there's a lot of people moving towards the cloud and moving towards SharePoint or SharePoint Online. So if someone would like to see a demonstration of that or learn more, that's what that's all about.
Great, thanks. So if you want to pop over to the next slide, I have a couple of questions here. Oops, there it goes. Additionally, both of our email addresses are up here on the screen. If you want to jot them down and you can think of something after this presentation, please feel free to do that. Okay, John, so the first question we have is, when you dispose of something and a FOIA request comes up regarding the disposed record, how can you defend that?
Okay. Well, so keep in mind that we're always going to be working and managing records with an approved schedule. In the case of the federal government, a NARA approved schedule, and we have the capability of producing destruction certificates when we do dispose of content, and we keep, an audit history and audit trail of all the activities that are going along with all of those records management activities.
Great. And the next one we have is, how easy is it to communicate between the FOIA and records management teams regarding legal holds? What is the process for the FOIA team to take a legal hold off?
Okay, I think I understand what the question is. We have a couple of ways that we can deal with this. If the FOIA team does not have direct access to the records management system, then what we've typically seen is that the records managers, those who do, or the coordinators that do have access, have the capability of creating these reports that actually are, a collection of all of the responsive records that maybe are candidates for being put on hold, and communicating that out to the FOIA team, whereby they can actually see the information, they can see the metadata that goes along with those records, and they can actually, in many cases, we've created a hyperlink URL that can actually look at the documents themselves to see what they are, and then can make decisions on whether or not it is, responsive. It's a good piece of information that needs to be released, and then that can be used to put the records on hold if they need to be, for part of the response. Then vice versa, once it's once it can be released, then the records managers can actually go and release the holds that are part of that legal hold in the system. And we could, if you wanted to see a demo of that, we could show that pretty easily.
Great, and we have a couple minutes left. I have some good resources on the next slide, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I don't think there were any more questions that slid in there, but if there are, we'll go ahead and respond to you via email after the presentation. But I just wanted to share a couple of web resources just for your own education. So the first one is the National Archives and Records Administration, or as John mentioned, NARA, actually established the Federal Freedom of Information Act Advisory Committee in 2014. And the purpose of this committee is to foster dialogue between the administration and the requester community, also to solicit public comments and develop consensus recommendations for improving FOIA administration and proactive disclosures. And then recently, the Archivists of the United States renewed the committee's 2-year charter in 2020. So I think there actually is an advisory committee meeting tomorrow, but registration has closed. But if you'd like to learn more on the committee meetings, you can go to this website, or if anybody doesn't have a pen to jot that down very quickly, we can send this to you after the presentation as well with all these resources. So the second resource is a reference guide from the National Archives. It has some great material on how they handled their FOIA requests. So it's great reference guide to look at if you're dealing with this. And lastly, for those who are in federal agencies, this link gives you some insight on the average spend for different federal agencies to give you an idea of just how expensive FOIA requests can be when you're considering choosing a tool to kind of cut costs and optimize the process. So these are great resources. And then I don't think there are any more questions that came in. There was a comment, you can watch the live stream of the advisory committee meeting. Thank you for that. So please check that out. Again, we will send this over via email for those interested. And then John, if you want to just pop to the last slide, we're going to end right on time. So hopefully if anybody has a hard stop, then this will be great. If anyone has any more questions, our contact information is right there on the screen. You can email us at info@gimbal.com, visit our website and fill out a demo request form, or just find more information on the products that were talked about in this presentation. And again, we're going to send out the recording via thank you email between 24 to 48 hours. And we thank everybody for joining today, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.